In this session, we want to implement our UML notion of a simple array in PowerShell. Now, I'll elaborate more on this, I think, towards the end, but PowerShell is object-oriented to the point where even arrays are considered objects. So they have properties and methods that you can't expect arrays in every language to have. So I'm going to try to stick to the basic fundamental notion of an array being a name with more than one value. And then we'll look at some other stuff as time permits. But again, so far all the variables we've had have had a single value. Even if it was an object, that was a value of an object. Now what we're saying, one name can actually have multiple values. Well, let's see it in action, I guess. So I've gone back to just a system, no objects involved here. And I've got my good old it's a lie and capacity and course variables, properties that I'm assigning values to. And then I've created something called fib, and I've said it's a new number brackets. And so the square brackets are an array operator. You may recall from an earlier video in PowerShell, they serve double duty. Those square brackets are sometimes an array operator and sometimes a cast operator. We're actually going to see both in use at the same time here, but one step at a time. So from UML, what we know is we'd say, oh, okay, fib is an array of 5 numbers. In other words, fib is a name, and it actually has 5 values. We can get to each of the values individually by using those square brackets with an index number in them. And the thing that we should know is that the index starts with 0. So we start counting with 0. In other words, fib bracket 0 is the first element in the array. Fib bracket 1 is the second element in the array, and so on. And so, yes, you can see what I've done here is I've said, okay, the first element in the array named fib should have a value of 0. The second one should have a value of 1. The third one should have a value of 1. The fourth one should have a value of 2. And the fifth one should have a value of 3. Okay. In code, what does that look like? Well, again, the first 3 lines here are variables. They're variables that we created. And then here is the line where we're saying fib is assigned an int array type, and then we're calling the new method, the new, which is a static method that'll come later as well. But essentially, all these native objects in PowerShell have and .NET have a static method named new, which means you can call it without having an object. It's a good thing because so far we don't have an object. So how are we going to get this int array object? And the answer is there is a method called new, and that method is static so that we can call it without having an array, an int array object. And I think we talked about this, we saw this before, but just briefly, and again, more details on it later, but the : is our scope resolution operator. And then what we see is it's like calling a constructor, and we're passing it a value of 5. So that is the number of elements we want in the array. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I want an array of integers, an integer array. I want a value, an object of that type, and we want to new it up with 5 elements. So once we have that, then we should be able to access each of the elements in the array and assign them a value. Okay, let's do this. Let's copy this. Come over here. I'll paste that in there. I will save that and come over here to my CLI and say, hey, PowerShell, why don't you take a look at /UML. I didn't want that. I wanted the PowerShell. There we go. Okay. And it runs. Okay. Disregard all my other nonsense in there. Okay. So that ran great. And then we can say, well, okay, let's prove it. So let's say we right host fib element 2. Okay. And we run it and we see that, okay, indeed, fib element 2 has a value of 1. Well, you're like, nah, maybe I'm not so sure because that could have been fib element 1. So let's do fib element 3. Save that. Run this again. Sure enough, it's 2. Okay. So feeling pretty good about that. The value in the brackets is any integer number. Normally, in a lot of languages, they can only be positive numbers, so they're not truly integers. PowerShell and a couple of other languages do allow negative indices, and usually if it's a negative indice, that means it starts from the end of the array of values, the end of the sequence of values. Well, let's try it. Let's see if we said fib element -3. And indeed, we see that's 1 because if this was the first, second, third element. Okay. Again, I wouldn't count on that in all languages allowing negative indices. The other thing that we probably should do is to say, what if I wanted a two-dimensional array? Okay. What would that mean? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that $2, and yes, I'm over in my CLI, so I don't have to keep saving and running it, kind of thing. Is so $2 is assigned an int array, and maybe what I should do is clarify this. 'Cause remember, spaces don't usually matter; they can just clarify things. And now that I'm thinking about this, I'm going to come back here and make this $1 because I'm just making a single one-dimensional array. $int array, that's the type, is a new array of, let's say, 7 elements. Okay. And then if I say, hey, $1, PowerShell is going to come back and spit out the values for it. And we see that there are 7 of them there, and they are all initialized to 0. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out is the brackets following a name or a type will indicate an array. When they are around a type, that's the cast operator. So that's one way you can tell, is anytime you have brackets following a name, that's an index. They're acting as an index operator. If they are surrounding a type, then they are the cast operator. And here, for example, they're surrounding an integer value, not a type. Okay? So then what I was going to do was I was going to say, okay, let me do this again, only this time I'm going to make this my $2. I'm thinking about a two-dimensional array. And so what I'm going to do is include a second set of brackets. Okay? And then when I new it up, I'm going to give it a dimension, a size for each dimension, I should say. So let's say we wanted to make this a 5 by 4 array. Okay, great. And now I tell PowerShell, hey, $2, and it spits back what it knows, which is that. And why did it do that? Well, we asked for a 5 by 4, so you can think of this as rows and columns, a matrix, a table, kind of thing, X and Y values if you want. And so 5 times 4 is 20, so this is actually 20 elements here. And if you count them up, there should be 20 there. And then the question is, well, okay, is it 5 of 4 or is it 4 of 5? Okay, in other words, rows and columns, which way does this go? So what we can do then is we can say, okay, $2, bracket element, so I'm now treating it as an array index, and I'm going to say 1, comma 2. Okay. And I'll assign that just a value that I'll recognize, like 3. Okay. So great, I do that and it doesn't work. I get an error message. It says array assignment to 1 comma 2 failed because assignment to slices is not supported. Oh yes, blah, this is for another day.